Hello, everyone, and welcome into Coach Craig's Sports. This is the NFL DFS video for week number 5. So, I've only made one video for NFL DFS so far this season, kind of looked team by team and talking about the players involved there. I think today and moving forward, I'm going to look a little bit more at my player pool, kind of the players that I like at each position, kind of talk a little bit about them. Try to make this video a little bit shorter in nature so it's a little bit easier to listen to and everything else like that. If you guys have any other suggestions for NFL DFS moving forward, also be sure to let me know. Probably going to try to mix in some first look videos here and there in the coming weeks as I do have a little bit more time opening up. But without further ado, we're going to start on the DraftKings side. We're going to look kind of position by position, talk a little bit about the players I'm most interested in for this week overall. At the quarterback position, we have Patrick Mahomes at $8,200, Jalen Hurts at $8,000. Both have very good matchups, so we'll have a decent amount of exposure to both. Both are very stackable this week, and I expect Mahomes to be the more popular option, but I still do like Jalen Hurts, and I think that's a good game stack with the Eagles and the Rams in a lot of ways to get leverage there as well. And then we move down to Tua, who is $7,100. Expect him to be very popular as well this week going against the Giants. Should be a pretty favorable matchup there. Kirk Cousins is another option at $6,900 if you want to get on the opposite end of that Minnesota and Kansas City game stack. And then kind of our pay down options at quarterback, CJ Stroud, $6,000. You know, it's a decent matchup versus Atlanta, but Atlanta's played a little bit better on defense this year. Stroud's been really good so far. So I do like him once again. Obviously, you're probably going to stack him with either Nico Collins or Tank Dell. Maybe even Dalton Schultz, who doesn't look too bad at $3,400 versus those linebackers that Atlanta is rolling out at this point in time. And then we got Josh Dobbs, $5,200, does offer a little bit of rushing upside. And then Zach Wilson at $4,900 going against Denver, who's not been the greatest defensively so far this year, although they do get Justin Simmons back this week. For the running back position, Bijan Robinson is obviously going to make a lot of sense against the Texans defense, who have allowed a lot of fantasy points to running backs so far this season. Then we have Derrick Henry, $7,500 going against the Colts. No Shaq Leonard this week. There's no Kwity Paye on the defensive line as well. DeForest Buckner's been banged up and hasn't been playing a lot of snaps. So it could be a little bit of a favorable matchup there. His offensive line is getting a little bit healthier if you want to go that direction. Probably a little bit more of a leverage play this week. And then Jonathan Taylor, as long as he's back, $6,800, going to look pretty interesting on the opposite side of that matchup. Then we see David Montgomery at $6,600. Very advantageous matchup. Should be a pretty chalk play versus Carolina this week. Obviously had the big week last week in the Thursday Night Football game. And then at the same time, Jahmyr Gibbs, a little bit banged up with a hamstring injury at this point in time, was limited in practice on Friday, so we'll see how that ultimately shakes out. Joe Mixon, I don't mind versus Arizona. Should be a pretty favorable matchup there. He's kind of been like the one Bengals player that's been decent at this point in time. Alvin Kamara had a really strong week 1. We'll see what it looks like against the Patriots. You know, since the Patriots are pretty well known of taking away the opposing team's best player. So could be an interesting matchup there. Not anybody I'm going out of my way for, but still going to be a pretty interesting play. And then we got Devon Achane, who is $6,100 going against the New York Giants, which looks to be a really favorable matchup. Micah McFadden, their second linebacker, is also banged up at this point in time. We'll see if he plays or not. I do expect Achane to be a pretty popular chalk option this week. DeAndre Swift, another part of that Eagles and Rams game stack. Do like him quite a bit at $6,000 though. And then kind of the next two running backs I do expect to be really chalky this week as well. And Isaiah Pacheco at $5,700, really good matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings, one of the best games to stack overall this week. And then we have Breece Hall at $5,400. Really, really favorable matchup versus Denver. And it sounds like he should be, kind of full go at this point in time. Not as much concern in terms of snap limits. At least that's what came out this week. And then kind of like the one lone guy that probably not a lot of people are talking about, we got Ezekiel Elliott here at $4,700. Ramondre Stevenson's been pretty banged up this week, so wouldn't be shocked if Zeke has a pretty big week, or, even if Stevenson misses, then Zeke would probably end up being a pretty chalky play overall. For our wide receivers on DraftKings, we have Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill at the top at $9,400 and $9,000 respectively. Both have pretty decent matchups. Both are obviously great elite wide receivers, so not too much to say there at this point in time. I do like Cooper Kupp at $8,600 as kind of that leverage play, because I don't think a lot of people are going to play him in his first game back, but he practiced some full 2 straight days this week. Don't really have any concerns there. It is a pretty interesting matchup versus the Eagles, which typically he lines up in the slot. The Eagles lost their slot corner in Avonte Maddox. Sometimes James Bradbury's been playing in the slot, so we'll see how that matchup ultimately pans out, but I think that's a really interesting game stack. I do like getting over the field on Cooper Kupp this week. And then we got A.J. Brown on the opposite side, $8,000. If you want to play him or Devonta Smith in this matchup is an interesting game stack. I think it's definitely warranted once again. And then we get down to Jalen Waddle, a little bit more expensive on the DraftKings side than the FanDuel side. I like him better on FanDuel this week, $7,500, but going against the New York Giants should be a pretty favorable matchup once again. We got Garrett Wilson at $6,000, probably getting a lot of Patrick Surtain this week, but a decent price tag at $6,000. If Justin Simmons, for whatever reason, doesn't end up playing, could be a favorable matchup for him as well. And then we got DeAndre Hopkins at $5,700. Really great matchup this week against the Colts, as long as his snap counts kind of bounce back up once again. As long as he looks a little bit healthier, should be a pretty favorable spot, maybe even a chalk option this week. Nico Collins, I expect to be pretty chalky at $5,600. I'm not crazy about the matchup, but if you're playing CJ Stroud, you're going to stack him with either Nico Collins or Tank Dell. I'd probably go the Tank Dell direction this week just because everybody else is going to go Nico. And then we have Michael Thomas at $4,900. Don't mind him versus the Patriots, who do have a pretty banged up cornerback unit at this point in time. Then we have Tyler Boyd at $4,500. T. Higgins dealing with some fractured ribs at this point in time. He was able to practice yesterday in a limited capacity, but is officially listed as questionable for this game. Don't think they really risk him at this point in time. The Cardinals don't have a true nickel corner at this point in time. They've been using kind of a safety down there. I cannot remember his name off the top of my head for the life of me at this point in time, but it does look like a pretty favorable matchup. Then Josh Reynolds at $4,200. Amon-Ra St. Brown is listed as doubtful at this point in time. So Josh Reynolds, Khalif Raymond, Jameson Williams, Marvin Jones, if you want to take a shot on one of those guys, could make some sense this week. Marvin Mims been really good when he's been on the field, but $4,000, getting up there in price tag for a guy that is not playing a lot of snaps. And then we saw Josh Downs have a couple decent weeks, so $3,700 if you want to go that direction. Michael Wilson had the 2-touchdown game last week at $3,700. And it's not a bad matchup versus the Bengals this week, who have Cam Taylor-Britt probably out with a concussion. And then Awuzie, dealing with a back injury, is also listed as questionable, so should be a pretty favorable matchup for him. Probably ultimately going to be a chalk play, but could be a good one at that as well. If you're playing Josh Dobbs, you probably want to stack him with Michael Wilson. And then kind of down here at the bottom, we got Calvin Austin, could bounce off for a big play at $3,500. And then Wando Robinson is the flat minimum at $3,000, and he drew 6 targets in that Monday Night Football game. Does look like he's playing a little bit more at this point in time. Do have some interest in him as kind of that pay down option. And then over at tight end, we got Travis Kelce. Not too much to say there at $7,600. Looks like a pretty good matchup versus the Vikings as well. And then on the opposite end of the game, we got T.J. Hockenson at $6,500. It does look like Nick Bolton should be back this week, but Hockenson has been pretty solid overall. Mark Andrews, I do like his price tag a lot on DraftKings at $5,500. Going against the Steelers, pretty favorable matchup there. They do get Rashad Bateman back this week, but I think Mark Andrews is still pretty safe. Sam Laporta gets that bump up with Amon-Ra St. Brown probably not playing this week with that doubtful tag at $5,000. Tyler Higbee is interesting at $4,100. Obviously a little bit banged up at this point in time going against the Eagles, which is a very favorable matchup. And then we get down to Dalton Schultz at $3,400. Already talked a little bit about him with CJ Stroud, $3,400. Going against that Atlanta Falcons team should be a pretty favorable matchup against those linebackers this week. And then we got Foster Moreau at $2,500 coming back from his own injury, but Juwan Johnson is scheduled to miss this game. Tried to play last week, did not ultimately end up going off with his own calf injury. We saw a lot of Jimmy Graham and Taysom Hill last week. Foster Moreau should be in there more times than not, I would expect. And then in terms of defenses, the Ravens against the Steelers looks like a pretty favorable matchup. The Steelers are going to be missing a couple starters on that offensive line as well. Ravens are getting a little bit healthier on the defensive end. Looks like Marcus Williams and potentially Marlon Humphrey will be back this week. Still missing pass rusher Odafe Oweh though, so we'll see how that ultimately ends up. Eagles could be an interesting one against the Rams if they can get some pressure on Matthew Stafford. Could be interesting there. Eagles have that pretty strong defense, but I do like this as kind of a potential game stack, so probably not one that I'm getting to quite as much. And then we get down to the Dolphins at $3,600. Probably the ultimate chalk defense this week against the New York Giants, who have been allowing a ton of sacks. I believe it was 10 sacks last week on Monday Night Football. That offensive line is even more banged up at this point in time. There is no Andrew Thomas, John Michael Schmitz, a couple other guys there on that offensive line. Evan Neal's a little bit banged up and hasn't been playing too good either. So looks like a really favorable matchup for that Dolphins team overall. Patriots and Saints, that kind of game could go either way. Probably a low-scoring game. $3,100, $3,000 respectively. Both are very much in play. And then we got the Jets at $3,100 going against the Broncos. I think they're a pretty favorable matchup there, and they have a pretty good defense overall. But that's kind of in a nutshell where I'm at DraftKings-wise, at least kind of thoughts-wise, going through it as kind of quick as possible, but trying to be informative as possible at the same time. And we're going to go over to the FanDuel side now. So we're going to look at the quarterbacks, the running backs, wide receiver, tight end, and defense once again. It's probably going to be pretty similar thoughts to the DraftKings side. So hopefully you're listening to all of it. If you're not, if you're just listening to the FanDuel side, I'll try to go as in-depth as possible once again. So for the FanDuel side, at the top, it's still Patrick Mahomes. It's still Jalen Hurts. Both have really favorable matchups. Both look like very enticing game stacks. Do think Mahomes will be the more chalky option this week. And then we get down to Tua, who's $8,000. Very favorable matchup for him versus the New York Giants. Obviously, he's got the wide receivers to make it happen as well, as long as he stays healthy in this game. And then Kirk Cousins, if you want to get on the opposite side of that Kansas City, Minnesota stack at $7,600, does make a little bit of sense there. A little bit of a leverage play from your Patrick Mahomes. And then the same three quarterbacks at the bottom, we got CJ Stroud, Zach Wilson, and Josh Dobbs. Probably playing more Josh Dobbs than Zach Wilson on the FanDuel side. Maybe a little bit more Zach Wilson than Josh Dobbs on the DraftKings side. All three are kind of viable, but, probably looks like a good week to pay up at the quarterback position in general. One of the biggest differences for this slate between DraftKings and FanDuel is the price tag of David Montgomery at $8,500. Still a very good matchup versus the Carolina Panthers this week. Like I said, on the DraftKings side as well, Jahmyr Gibbs a little bit banged up at this point in time. Could limit his snap counts. Whether or not he plays technically listed as questionable at this point in time. But John Robinson still looks great on both sides, $8,200. Going against the Texans that have allowed a lot of fantasy points to the running back position. DeAndre Swift, kind of another high riser in terms of price tag, but $7,700, kind of taking that lion's share for the Eagles backfield. Like the matchup against the Rams this week, should be pretty involved as well. And then we got Devon Achane once again at $7,500. A little bit more of a price tag over here, but nothing too crazy at this point in time. Still very much like the matchup against the Giants. Still think he's going to be a pretty chalky option once again this week after back-to-back strong weeks. And then Jonathan Taylor at $7,400. Still think he's going to be a very interesting option at $7,400. Maybe one that not a lot of people are getting to. Alvin Kamara, going against the Patriots. Still kind of the same scenario as DraftKings, where the Patriots try to take away the other team's best player. We'll see ultimately how it pans out. Probably also depends a lot on who's at quarterback, whether it's Jameis Winston or Derek Carr in this game. If it's Derek Carr, once again, probably not pushing the ball too far down the field and helping out the target share for Alvin Kamara once again this week. And then we get down to Joe Mixon at $7,000. Still like him as a very interesting play. It's a good matchup versus Arizona this week. He's kind of been the one lone Bengal that's actually been doing something so far, so definitely do like him. Isaiah Pacheco, Breece Hall, expect him to be chalky on both sides. And Pacheco's got the good matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings at $6,600. Breece Hall's got the good matchup against the Denver Broncos at $6,500. And sounds like he should be upping his usage once again this week. I threw in Miles Sanders on the FanDuel side, $6,100. We'll see ultimately how that pans out. Going against the Lions could be an okay matchup, but they've been a little bit better against the run so far this season. And then kind of our two paydown options here. Jaylen Warren at $5,800. Najee Harris has been a little bit banged up this week, so there could be some more opportunities for him, going against Baltimore. It's a decent matchup. And then Ezekiel Elliott, obviously, with Ramondre Stevenson being banged up at $5,300, could be some upside to be had there. At wide receiver, we go to Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson once again at the top, $9,400, $9,200. Still don't have to say too much here. Very good matchups for both of these players, obviously elite talents at their position. And then, like I said, on the DraftKings side, Cooper Kupp's actually $100 cheaper on FanDuel at $8,500. Do expect him to play. Eagles haven't been the greatest against the slot. They've been throwing James Bradbury in there a little bit the past couple of weeks since Avonte Maddox has been out. So should be an interesting matchup. Like him as kind of that leverage play that once again this week. And then on the opposite side, you get A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith once again. I think both are very reasonable options in a game stack with the Philadelphia Eagles and the Rams this week overall. Jalen Waddle I like a lot more on FanDuel at $6,800. He's $700 cheaper over here. So he looks like a pretty good play, maybe even a cash game play this week. Then we get to Tyler Boyd at $6,200, a little bit more expensive in terms of total price tag for him this week. Don't expect T. Higgins to play with that fractured rib, although he's technically listed as questionable after practicing in a limited capacity yesterday. Still very much like DeAndre Hopkins at $6,100. The Colts cornerbacks have not been good, especially against outside wide receivers so far this season. Then we got Tank Dell at $6,000. Still a very stackable option with CJ Stroud. If you really want to go the Nico Collins route, you could. It's just the bigger price tag on the FanDuel side this week. And then we got Michael Thomas once again for the Saints, $5,700. Ultimately, like him a little bit better if Jameis Winston starts this week, but the Patriots are pretty banged up at that quarterback position. And they obviously traded for J.C. Jackson this week, who has not been that great since he's left the Patriots system. Marvin Mims, $5,500, a little bit of upside dart throw if you want to go there, but really hasn't been playing the snap counts to make it happen for the most part this season. But if he goes up and plays like 50% of snaps, all of a sudden could be a really interesting option against the Jets. They are without DJ Reed on the one side at corner, so it's just Sauce Gardner there. Probably seeing, I believe it's Bryce Hall on the opposite side as well. And then we get to Josh Downs, had some upside games here and there at $5,300. Probably not a guy that's not drawing a lot of ownership at this point in time. Michael Wilson, $5,300. If you're playing Josh Dobbs, play Michael Wilson once again this week. Heck, if you're not playing Josh Dobbs, still probably can play Michael Wilson at a pretty reasonable price tag after a 2-touchdown game. And a decent matchup against Cincinnati this week where Cam Taylor-Britt is out with a concussion. And then Awuzie has been dealing with a back injury this week and might also miss. And then the last two guys that we have, kind of dart throws here, Calvin Austin, $4,800, Khalif Raymond at $4,800 as well. Just speedsters that get down the field. Should be a little bit more opportunities for each of them this week in total. And then we get over to our tight ends. We got Travis Kelce at $8,700. Does make a lot of sense against that Minnesota Vikings team. Mark Andrews, a little bit more expensive on the FanDuel side, $7,600. So he's not quite as appealing over there. Like him a lot more on DraftKings. TJ Hawkinson still going to be very viable against Kansas City this week, especially in those game stacks, $6,800. Nick Bolton is back this week, most likely though. And then we got Sam Laporta at $6,000. Amon-Ra St. Brown, doubtful to play this week, so should boost up Laporta just a little bit. Tyler Higbee, good matchup against the Eagles, also a little bit banged up in total over the last couple of weeks. And then we have Dalton Schultz at $4,900. Decent matchup against Atlanta, especially the linebackers they're throwing out there at this point in time. And then once again, we got Foster Moreau, who is playing most likely as the starter in place of Jawan Johnson after missing last week. For our defenses, we got the Ravens going against Pittsburgh. Once again, Pittsburgh Steelers, hasn't been the greatest year for them, especially offensively. Offensive line's pretty banged up at this point in time, missing a couple different starters. Dolphins going to be a pretty chalky option versus the Giants, who are missing a ton of starters on the offensive line once again, and they just gave up double-digit sacks in their most recent game either way. Eagles are kind of the one that's there. They have the good defense, but they're playing against the Rams. There's opportunities to be had there, but I think it's an interesting game stack, so probably the last one that I would play out of the defenses that I do have listed here. And then we have the Patriots at $4,400. Saints at $4,000. I think that game's going to be pretty low scoring just in general. Both those defenses could kind of pan out this week, so a little bit of exposure to both does make a lot of sense. Jets at $4,200 versus the Broncos. Jets defense is pretty strong. Obviously, they're missing DJ Reed, but should be a pretty favorable matchup versus the Broncos overall this week. And last but not least, we have the Texans at $3,600. Going against the Atlanta Falcons, pretty reasonable price tag here. Atlanta's not the greatest offense in the world by any means. They're pretty good at running the ball, but if you can get after Desmond Ridder, if you can build a lead pretty early, should be a pretty favorable matchup for this Texans defense overall. But with that being said, that's kind of what I do have in terms of NFL DFS for week number 5. If you guys want some more thoughts whatsoever, you have any specific questions, feel free to drop them down in the comments or reach out to me on Twitter at Coach Craig Sport, and would be more than happy to help you over there as well. If there's a player that you guys think I should have listed in the player pool, feel free to let me know. If there's a guy that you think's kind of in here and didn't really deserve to be in here, you can also let me know that as well. And kind of just tell me who you're going to be overweight, underweight to on the field. Maybe you're going after some chalk. It's probably going to be a pretty chalky week this week overall, I would assume, which I think it's a lot of good chalk this week. So not going to knock that too much overall. Should be a pretty interesting week. Get creative with some of those game stacks. The Chiefs and the Dolphins are going to be really popular teams to stack this week, so just keep that in mind as you're building out your lineups. But with that being said, that's pretty much what I do have at this point in time. If you're brand new, checking my channel out for the very first time, first of all, welcome in. Second of all, definitely do appreciate it. If you are someone that is checking my channel out for the very first time or have yet to subscribe, please consider doing so. Definitely would appreciate it. Helps to build the community that we're trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports, which is one that's truly for you, the viewers, helping you with your DFS. Right now, we got NFL DFS and CFL DFS. Later this month, we'll be doing some NBA DFS Monday through Friday as well, so definitely be sure to check out all that content. And then with that being said, that's pretty much what I do have at this point in time. Also, be sure to check out the links down in the description below with the promo codes, everything else like that. If you're into sports betting, prop betting, anything else like that, BetUS, Parlay Play, and Prize Picks helps you guys out a little bit. If you are a first-time depositor, helps me out a little bit on the side as well. But with that being said, that's all that I truly have at this point in time. Definitely do appreciate each and every one of you tuning in to this video. Definitely means a lot to me. I hope that each and every one of you have a great rest of your day, no matter what day you're watching this on. a pretty good weekend overall, and some really good luck in NFL DFS for week number 5.